search warrant! Open the door! Open the door! Police search warrant! Police search warrant!
FBI and DEA have launched a large-scale federal operation in Minneapolis, targeting a fentanyl network believed to be operated by members within the Somali community.
Federal agents removed an estimated 1.08 million lethal doses of fentanyl from the streets of Minneapolis, an amount authorities warned was enough to devastate an entire region. The seizure included counterfeit pills made to look like Adderall, fentanyl, and methamphetamine crystals, much of it traced back to Mexico. These drugs were part of a broader federal crackdown on the Sinaloa cartel in New England that led to 171 high-level arrests and the seizure of more than 500 pounds of narcotics. Agencies, including the FBI, ICE, and DEA, emphasized that this operation targeted cartel leadership rather than low-level dealers, calling the cartel one of the most serious threats to public health and safety. Officials said the effort represents a major step toward dismantling the organization's influence. In Minneapolis, investigators revealed that some Somali family-based crews had quietly blended into everyday life, transporting drugs with their children and building million-dollar fentanyl operations alongside unsuspecting neighbors. In one quiet South Minneapolis neighborhood, where winter frost-coated rooftops and life appeared calm, a man known locally as Abdul Rahman Noor Ali, a soft-spoken community organizer and business owner who donated to charities, was living a double life that few suspected. His family lived in a two-story brick home valued at $820,000, a visible symbol of success and respect in the community. Behind the warm smiles and polite conversations, however, investigators later uncovered a far more troubling reality. Federal records revealed $6.3 million in unexplained cash movement over just 22 months, funneled through cultural associations, small import businesses, and private transfers that never appeared on any tax filings. Neighbors believed they were safe and trusted the man living next door, unaware that the truth had been hiding in plain sight. That truth did not surface on its own. It emerged because of a single, seemingly insignificant moment. The turning point came on a cold January evening at 9:18 p.m. along Lake Street in Minneapolis, during a routine traffic stop for a broken taillight. The driver, Mohammed Farhan Isi, 32, a relative of Abdurrahman known locally as a delivery driver, appeared unremarkable, but inside the trunk, officers found two sealed black bundles, a digital scale, and $47,600 in cash wrapped in rubber bands. Field tests confirmed fentanyl, enough powder to produce more than 180,000 lethal doses. From that moment, the case escalated beyond local authorities. The report was forwarded to federal agencies, and within 48 hours, a joint task force was formed. The investigation brought together the FBI in Minneapolis, the DEA, Homeland Security Investigations, and Customs and Border Protection. Rather than moving quickly, agents proceeded with caution, launching quiet surveillance around the neighborhood. They analyzed phone records, tracked late-night vehicle movements, and followed unexplained money transfers, gradually uncovering a hidden network. What began as a single traffic stop soon led investigators deep inside the family itself, fundamentally changing the scope of the case. Over the next 8 weeks, authorities mapped out the structure of the operation. What appeared to be an ordinary extended family was, in reality, a tightly organized network centered around Abdurrahman Noor Ali. His younger brother, Yusef Noor, 38, managed logistics, arranging late-night drop-offs behind grocery stores and small warehouse lots. A cousin, Hodan Wars, 34, tracked expenses and payments in handwritten ledgers, written partly in English and partly in Somali. Another relative coordinated short-route drivers who made discreet deliveries across Richfield, Bloomington, and South Minneapolis. The operation was quiet and methodical, with transactions taking place in familiar, unremarkable locations. A community market parking lot, a repair garage after hours, or the back entrance of a cafe where no one asked questions. To neighbors, it looked like normal family life, with gatherings, weekend cookouts, and children playing outside. But surveillance records told a different story, documenting dozens of late-night vehicle exchanges and a steady flow of cash that never passed through the banking system. The pattern, was no longer a coincidence, but a carefully built system. At 4:56 a.m., Minneapolis was still wrapped in winter darkness, the streets silent as wind cut through the frozen air, and snow reflected the glow of streetlights. Most residents slept, unaware that their quiet block was about to become the center of a federal operation. 12 unmarked vehicles rolled in to form a perimeter as 43 agents from the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security took their positions, each assigned to a specific entry point after months of preparation. The newer corner house stood motionless, windows dim, and frost clinging to the glass, a place agents had observed from afar for months. This was the morning they would move in. The calm was heavy and tense, the kind that precedes an irreversible moment. Then the silence shattered as clear. Synchronized commands cut through the cold air, a sound neighbors would later say confirmed that something had been wrong all along. Inside the house, sudden movement followed, doors slammed, footsteps rushed. Two men tried to barricade themselves in a back room, while another attempted to flee through a side entrance, slipping on ice as tactical lights lit up the yard. Agents advanced with control and precision, sealing off every exit. This was not chaos, but a deliberate and coordinated end to a long-running operation. It was precision. What followed was not a dramatic movie scene, but a desperate scramble between people who realized the truth had finally caught up to them and agents who had spent 8 months building the case. The tension was thick, as if the air itself was holding its breath. In the hallway, officers discovered 9 identical black duffel bags stacked neatly against the wall, each one sealed tight. Nearby sat a high-speed cash counter, still plugged in and frozen on its last tally, 182,400, an incomplete cycle. Loose bills were scattered across the floor. Inside a drawer, agents found a concealed 9mm handgun. In a storage room, there were 24 plastic containers marked with coded initials. But it was the basement that changed everything. Under a single hanging light stood a 12-foot wooden table covered with ledgers, notebooks, transfer receipts, hard drives, and shipment logs spanning at least 26 months. Names, routes, quantities, and totals were carefully recorded, and beside them lay 5 black bundles identical to those seized during the traffic stop. Field analysis estimated their potential output at more than 900,000 lethal doses, enough to devastate an entire city. For a moment, the room fell silent. Standing beneath that dim light, agents fully grasped what had been moving through the city. Not rumor or speculation, but a structured, deliberate network operating quietly within a neighborhood that trusted it. In the doorway stood Abd Rahman, no longer the respected community figure people believed him to be. The house no longer felt like a family home. It felt like the command center of a hidden operation, a storm that had finally been dragged into the light. Once the noise and movement of the raid subsided, agents focused on something far quieter and far more revealing than anything found upstairs. The basement table, still lit by a single dangling bulb, held answers that weapons and bundles alone could not explain. What lay there was not just evidence, but years of concealed truth. The ledgers were stacked neatly, each bound with rubber bands now brittle from age. Some notebooks were new and crisp, recently purchased, while others were worn at the edges, their yellowed pages filled with handwriting that evolved over time but clearly belonged to the same person, Hodan Warsame, the cousin responsible for keeping the financial records. Agents opened the oldest ledger first. Early entries were modest: small payments, local transfers, and donations tied to community events. As the years progressed, the figures grew. Entries of $1,000 became $10,000. Personal expenses blended with business transfers, and cash deposits appeared without any legitimate source. Around the 5th year, the tone of the writing shifted. The numbers grew bolder, the transfers more frequent, and the amounts far beyond what any visible family business could support. One entry stood out to a detective: $118,400, marked only with Minneapolis, Columbus, CW, with no invoice or explanation. Another ledger revealed a pattern of international transfers routed through Dubai, Nairobi, and Istanbul, each amount deliberately kept just below reporting thresholds. Figures like $8,950, $9,200, and $9,700. The amounts had been chosen deliberately, each one kept just below federal reporting thresholds. Beside those figures, the same phrase appeared again and again: Community Relief Fund donation processed. Investigators recognized it immediately. The fund had been inactive since 2019. A second binder offered even more clarity, containing printed bank statements from 4 separate financial institutions. Nearly $1.8 million had been cycled through accounts belonging to distant cousins, elderly relatives, and even 2 individuals who had returned to Somalia years earlier. On paper, the transfers were labeled as family support, medical aid, or tuition payments. But the timing, frequency, and consistency told a different story. This was not family assistance. It was the signature of a professional laundering operation. At the far end of the table sat a laptop, still powered on. Its desktop contained a folder labeled Business Imports. Inside were spreadsheets detailing shipments that never existed, crates that were never logged, trucks that were never rented, and distributors with no registration anywhere in Minnesota. Yet the figures matched perfectly with the cash movements recorded in Hodan's ledgers. This was not improvisation, it was design. A laundering structure built carefully over more than a decade. The most disturbing discovery came from a notebook written entirely in Somali. Once translated, it documented 12 years of cash consolidation, coded distribution routes, and references to partners in the north and supply channels across the border. On the final page was a single calculation: 6,347,900 cleared in 22 months. The agents paused, not because the number was surprising, but because it confirmed something far more serious. The network extended well beyond Minneapolis, beyond the Neuer family, and far beyond anything local authorities had imagined. What lay on that table was not simple bookkeeping, it was the blueprint of a hidden empire, and investigators had only just uncovered its first layer. When agents carried the financial evidence out of the house, they expected the case to feel clearer and more concrete: numbers, charts, transfers, and seized cash, neatly explaining what had happened. Instead, the weight of it all felt heavier. Behind every dollar traced and every coded line in a ledger were consequences no spreadsheet could fully capture. As dawn broke over Minneapolis, investigators gathered in a briefing room at the downtown Federal Building. A large map of the metro area covered one wall, and one by one, red pins were added. Each marked an overdose call, a fentanyl-related emergency, or a death recorded over the past 18 months. The board filled quickly: South Minneapolis, Richfield, Bloomington, Brooklyn Park, with clusters forming near high schools, shelters, and apartment complexes. Finally, a quiet agent voiced what everyone was thinking. This didn't happen somewhere far away. It happened here, to our neighbors. The human cost was not abstract. It was deeply personal. Hennepin County records showed 173 fentanyl-related deaths in the past year alone, many linked to pills identical to those found in the Nur basement. Some victims were teenagers who believed they were taking something harmless. Others were older adults managing chronic pain, unaware their medication had been replaced with counterfeit tablets. In one documented case, a 62-year-old bus driver from Bloomington collapsed in his living room. He had no history of drug use. The pill that killed him contained 3 times a lethal dose of fentanyl. His daughter later told investigators he had purchased it from a family friend, words that suddenly carried a far darker meaning. And the tragedy did not end with the victims. The Somali community itself, made up of hardworking families, elders, refugees, and small business owners, felt the impact deeply, bearing the pain of betrayal alongside loss. For decades, the community had built a reputation for resilience in Minneapolis, supporting one another through displacement and rebuilding their lives through faith and strong communal bonds. Now, many feared being judged for the actions of a small number of individuals who chose greed over their own people. An elder at a local mosque captured that pain in an interview, saying, "We fled war to find peace. We never imagined trouble would rise from within our own homes." In response, parents began accompanying their teenagers more closely, community centers increased security, and local leaders organized town hall meetings not to defend the guilty, but to protect innocent families from stigma and suspicion. As the investigation continued, agents uncovered another troubling pattern. Members of the network often brought children along during deliveries, not as protection, but because families were less likely to be stopped or questioned. One surveillance report described a minivan pulling into a parking lot, 2 young children asleep under blankets in the back seat, while thousands of counterfeit pills were hidden in the trunk. For investigators, that discovery carried more weight than any ledger or financial record. The harm was no longer just about numbers or statistics. It was about children unknowingly caught in criminal roots, families losing loved ones to substances measured in milligrams, and a community betrayed by people living among them. As the full scope of the operation became clear, one reality stood out. The damage reached far beyond the arrests themselves. The network left behind a trail of broken trust, grieving families, and quiet suffering, the kind that lingers long after the headlines fade. And the investigation was far from over. In the first week after the raid, it became clear that what happened at the Noor residence was not an ending, but a beginning. The evidence collected that morning did not close the case. It expanded it. Investigators realized they were not standing at a conclusion, but at the threshold of a much larger and more complex operation than they had anticipated. Inside the federal building, agents began cross-referencing data across state lines. Ledgers from the basement aligned with transactions flagged months earlier in Columbus, Denver, and Kansas City. Links emerged between phone numbers in Minneapolis and encrypted accounts traced to Arizona and Southern California areas known as major entry points for cartel-linked distribution routes. Financial analysts also uncovered payments moving through small, Somali-owned businesses across 3 states. Each transaction deliberately kept under $10,000, mirroring the same laundering pattern detailed in Hodan's notebooks. One investigator summarized the moment quietly. They hadn't dismantled a network. They had uncovered a doorway into a much larger one. Surveillance requests multiplied, warrants were expanded to new locations, and agents began monitoring storage units, warehouses, and short-term rental properties in Street, Cloud, Rochester, and Fargo. Then came a discovery that would shift the entire direction of the investigation. A seized phone revealed a folder labeled Times Brother Lines *. Inside were images of handwritten notes listing meeting points, coded initials, and references to northern partners. Once decrypted, several entries appeared to point to a second cell operating in northern Minnesota, possibly coordinating shipments along rural highways under the cover of night. This discovery launched a second, far more complex phase of the investigation. Task force leaders faced a hard truth. If a single family in Minneapolis could move over $6 million in under 2 years while coordinating with out-of-state actors, it was likely that other families, other homes, and other quiet streets were harboring similar operations. The investigation widened. Agents visited community centers, schools, and local mosques, not to accuse, but to protect, holding private briefings with elders to explain that the focus was on individuals who exploited culture and faith, not the community itself. Many residents came forward, sharing observations they had once dismissed as minor or irrelevant. Gradually, patterns emerged. Similar vehicles, repeated visitors, and unexplained cash flows. Analysts from Homeland Security traced several shipments back to a warehouse in Ontario, Canada, suggesting a cross-border route feeding into Minneapolis. This led to coordination with Canadian intelligence, expanding the investigation beyond U.S. borders. Every new lead carried weight. Every small detail hinted at a larger, still unfinished network. But agents faced a growing challenge. The network was adaptive. As arrests made headlines, others connected to the Minneapolis cell began disappearing from view, going silent and forcing investigators to move even more cautiously. Phones went dark. Accounts were wiped clean. Vehicles vanished from their usual meeting spots. Several suspects abruptly abandoned their apartments without warning. One senior agent observed, "The moment light hits them, they scatter, but shadows always leave a trail." And the trail did continue across city lines, state borders, and possibly even international boundaries. The Noor family had fallen, but the system that had empowered them remained alive, shifting beneath the surface, seeking new faces, new homes, new ways to operate. The investigation did not slow, it intensified. Law enforcement now understood the truth. The raid at the Noor residence was not the climax, it was the opening chapter of a much larger battle, one that could take months or even years to fully uncover. As agents prepared for the next phase, a question hung over the room. If this much was hidden in a single Minneapolis neighborhood, what else remained lurking in the shadows? Stepping back from the raids, the ledgers, the numbers, and the frozen streets of Minneapolis, one truth is unavoidable. This was not just a criminal case, it was a failure of awareness, a failure of oversight, and a stark reminder that danger does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it grows quietly inside the neighborhoods we trust the most. For years, these networks operated beneath a veneer of respectability, behind charity titles, inside family gatherings, and under the comforting assumption of, they would never do that. The evidence tells a different story. More than 1.08 million potential fentanyl doses, enough to devastate an entire region, moved quietly through neighborhoods, cultural centers, and ordinary homes. While policymakers debated and agencies stretched limited resources, families buried loved ones, and communities lost trust, Minneapolis learned a painful lesson. When accountability disappears, vulnerability grows. This case raises uncomfortable questions. Who missed the warning signs? Why were financial red flags ignored? How did cross-border transfers, shell accounts, and coded ledgers operate for years without intervention? And most importantly, how many other neighborhoods live under the same illusion of safety? This wasn't just Minneapolis, it was a mirror, reflecting what happens when organized networks exploit immigration systems, social programs, religious institutions, and community goodwill, not to uplift people, but to profit from their suffering. The lesson is clear for leaders, communities, and all of us. Trust must never replace vigilance, compassion must never silence scrutiny, and when innocent people pay the price, silence becomes complicity. The value of this investigation lies here. We must ask harder questions, protect the honest, and expose those who hide behind them. Justice is not just about arrests, it's about prevention, responsibility, and refusing to look away when something feels wrong. If you believe communities deserve protection, not betrayal, tap like. If you believe oversight matters, comment times accountability times so more people see this story. And if you want to follow the work uncovering what lies behind these networks, share this video and subscribe. The investigation isn't over. Not in Minneapolis, not in America, and not anywhere danger still hides in plain sight.